Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for OUP's annual Ask a VC webinar. I'm Kirsten Loite of Osage University Partners, and I head up our university relations efforts here at OUP. Go to the next slide. As usual, I'm joined by two of our managing partners here at OUP. I'll have them introduce themselves. Mark, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Marc Singer. I'm a managing partner at AEP and a co-founder, and I focus on tech investments, which includes everything from hardware to software to climate technologies. And I've been in the venture industry for about 30 years.
Great, thanks, Bill.
And Bill Harrington, also one of the managing partners here. And my background is originally an MD and was a general partner at Three Arch Partners out on Sand Hill Road for a little over 14 years, and came out to Philadelphia about 13 years ago to join Marc in the early days of OUP1 and start to build out our life science team.
Great. Thank you both for joining us again for yet another one of these terrific webinars. Our webinar today is going to be discussion-based, and we'll dive into our main subject matter in just a little bit. But please do have your questions ready. This is a Q&A webinar, so please use the Q&A tool to put your questions in. We did receive a lot of questions beforehand that we'll be answering as well. So we'll go to the next slide, because first we're going to talk about a few logistics. A recording of this webinar will be available on OUP's partner portal, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel. You can use those QR codes down on the lower right-hand side to get to both of those resources. The partner portal is an online portal for our tech transfer officers and researchers at our partner universities that's full of relevant tech transfer and startup content. Once you're in the portal, which you do need to register for, and again, it's only available to our people at our partner universities, you'll find a downloadable you'll find a link to this presentation in there on the webinars page, which is under the startup resources section. You also can join us for future webinars. We have a couple of webinars coming up on October 15th. We have a webinar featuring investors in the AI space, discussing the industry and particular interests for them. And then on November 14th, we're going to host a webinar on venture studios. So stay tuned for registration information on that webinar as well. And if you don't have the registration information yet for the Industry Focus AI webinar, please just let us know and we'd be happy to send that along. For everyone who has registered for this webinar, we will be sending you the link to the recording for this webinar in the next week or so. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. Great. So just a short intro on OUP for those of you who don't know us. We're a venture capital fund that partners with academic institutions to invest in their startups, typically by exercising participation rights available through their licenses. As a part of this partnership, the institutions share in our profits and receive programmatic support on tech transfer and academic startups, things like we're doing today. OUP is now on its fourth fund and has made investments in close to 150 companies in all areas of deep sciences. Many those companies have achieved successful exits, either through IPOs or M&A, and we're actively investing in these deep science startups, which you can see a smattering of on the following slide from our portfolio. If we go to the next slide, this slide shows that we invest both in life sciences as well as tech, and some of the areas that we've invested in particular. We're always happy to talk about our model, so feel free to reach out to us with any questions if that's of interest. So with that, we're going to go to this Q&A with Marc and Bill. We can take down the slides now, Katie. Thank you. So we're going to be going through a lot of questions that were provided to us beforehand. But again, please use that Q&A tool to ask us further questions. We're happy to dive into any subject matter that touches on the venture capital world. So we're going to start off with a section about teams and founders. And I'm going to ask this question of both of you. Start with you, Bill, though. What are the ingredients for a good founding team? And after the initial team, who are the next most important team members to add?
Thanks, Kirsten. Well, founding team conjures a lot of different images, at least when I think about that. Founders are scientifically, in our world at OUP, founders are usually scientists. And the question is, are they leaving their day job? Are they going to be consulting with a new company? Who's going to be full-time in a company? Is it often in our world, it's graduate students and postdocs who go on to full-time employment in a new company, and they bring with them the institutional knowledge and the connection to the original founding lab. So as a founding team, I kind of divide it into the founding scientific team I just discussed, and then you need somebody or a small number of people to really translate that science into a commercial opportunity. It doesn't have to be a founding CEO. It can be a program manager or an acting CEO, somebody to pull the science into a form that potential investors can digest, can understand why it's important, can understand how it fits into the broader landscape, and where the commercial opportunity may lie and what the hurdles are to get there, both regulatory and otherwise. So from our perspective, a founding team, a seed company, an early founding team coming out of academia really needs to have both a scientific component and we'll call it a translational business component, but it doesn't need to be a fully formed C-suite of executives. Most of these companies go through several, we'll call it management teams and several CEOs between founding and exit. Each of them tend to specialize and have expertise in particular phases of a company's development. So when we talk about founding teams, it's really who has the skills, who has the experience and the perspective to take what could be very exciting science and translate it into a story that would resonate with investors looking more at commercial opportunities. So that's the original team. I think your second part of that question is what are the next few hires? And again, it really depends. I'm just focusing on life science here, and therapeutics in particular. It's, what is it going to require to get through that first set of milestones, which are usually preclinical sorts of studies. So you need someone who has that expertise, like a chief scientific officer who's not necessarily the founder, who is full-time, wakes up, goes to sleep thinking about how do they advance the science for this particular company, not in a broader PI's lab setting. So I would say that kind of CSO type of person would be the next hire that I would look for.
Marc, anything to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll kind of hit on a couple of similarities and more of the differences between tech companies and life science companies. On the similarity side, kind of that scientific base is critical, and we do like to see individuals from the lab who worked on that research come over and join the company full time. Again, that's often a grad student or somebody who can help really translate the research at the company level. Beyond that, once we're bringing in outsiders, generally the first type of person we're looking for in a tech company is a product-oriented person that can address the challenge of taking great technology and great research and truly figuring out what product to go build with it and what use cases to apply it to, in what markets, and what target customers. So figuring out that journey from technology into product is really hard and traditionally has been hard for academics to do without having done it before. And so often the first person we are looking to hire is a VP of product or a chief product officer or somebody who understands product and how to build product for target markets. So that's often the pairing that we're looking for. That person could be a CEO, they could be a product person, they could be have some other title, but we really want that skill set in the company.
Mm-hmm. Great. Next question, again, from one of our people who had written in beforehand, and I'll start with you, Marc. When should the tech transfer office coach their PIs to postpone company creation and continue their research at the university, both for company funding as well as development reasons?
Yeah, I would say as a general guiding principle, there should never be a rush to create a company. It is always better if you can progress your company, your technology, and your product inside the university. It is almost always better to do that and not start the clock by hiring people, which creates a burn rate for the company that you need to fund, and then you need to raise capital, and all of a sudden kind of the stakes grow pretty quickly. And unless you can continue to make progress and raise capital, that creates risk around it. So if you can fund your technology at the university for longer to answer critical questions that are important as you develop a company, it is generally better to stay in the university. And only once you've really figured out kind of what your product really is, what target market, or in the life science world, like what's your target, your drug profile, the more you can figure these things out early inside the university, the easier it will be to raise capital, the easier it will be to hire people. And so everything gets easier on the company side when you wait longer. Every once in a while, there is kind of a counterpoint to that, which is there'll be a sector that has explosive investor interest and lots of competitive activity where you no longer want to wait. So that happened several years ago around nuclear fusion, where all of a sudden you started seeing lots and lots of university spinouts in fusion, raising capital. And so there came a point in time where you, to some degree, had to go down that road if you wanted to be competitive. It's happening now around AI infrastructure and foundational models. So if you find yourself in a world where you're hearing about 10 other funded startups in a short period of time, perhaps you should accelerate out of the university, but otherwise I would tend to wait.
Bill, anything you want to add on that on the life sciences side?
Well, I think Mark touched on most of the relevant issues. I think, and they apply in life science as well. I think the longer you wait, the more mature your science is, and the more likely you are to be able to hire talented outsiders because it's a more mature opportunity. I do think in life science and in therapeutics in particular, we have seen a number of institutions or groups of institutions put the resources in place to advance the drug discovery effort beyond simply the scientific discovery in the lab. And I think to the extent you can avail yourself of those resources and do some of that early development work, it can be very helpful. We have also seen the flip side, which is companies coming out of emerging from universities claiming to have a clinical candidate or various milestones already achieved that they were able to do within the university confines. And when you really kind of unwrap that a little bit, it's not as robust as would be conducted. Those studies are not as robust as those that would be conducted at a CRO or a commercial outside entity. And oftentimes you've got to kind of go back and redo some of the medicinal chemistry or some of the other work because it just wasn't done to that standard. So although I agree with Mark, I would progress it as far as you can. At some point, you really do need outside capital to accomplish what you need to get done to really raise institutional.
Thank you both. I'm going to talk about when we're looking at the management teams, how we decide whether they're worth backing. And Mark, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I would say as a firm, we have spent a lot of time trying to evaluate our evaluation of management teams. So to ask ourselves, like, how do we evaluate, how do we rate somebody, decide if they're good at being a CEO or a CSO or some other position? Are we accurate? Do we have biases in our evaluation? And in particular, we've tried to answer the question of what are really the critical determinants of success of any member of a founding management team. And we have struggled to come up with a clear, definable formula that can say it is these 4 things and only these 4 things that make someone successful. The reality is success and failure come in lots of different forms with lots of different personality traits and experience traits. So there is not one key thing to evaluate a management team on. But there are a lot of criteria that we think about as we're evaluating teams because it is far and away the most important decision we are going to make. So even though we are investing in science-driven companies, at the end of the day, it's the team that is going to make that science successful or not. So we're really investing in people first, in science second. And so our evaluation of those people is really important. So let me just kind of highlight some of the things we think about when we are evaluating a team. First, we do look at their prior track record and say, do they have a track record of success? That does not mean they need to have done exactly what they are doing right now with the startup. More, we are thinking in what they have done in the past, have they been successful? So if they've only been in academia, have they been successful in academia? If they've been in industry, have they been successful there? So we're looking for marks of success in whatever somebody has done in the past. Second, we are looking for a bunch of personality characteristics, such as whether they're really deeply thoughtful And if they're taking a lot of information, they process it, and they have good judgment around it, where they're always trying to learn and get input from other people, whether their opinions actually change over time in a good way as they get new information. We're also evaluating their sales skills. So at the end of the day, in particular, CEO has to continually fundraise and sell the company to employees, partners. And so being a good salesperson is a really critical skill, even for a science-driven company, in particular because you have to raise capital. And then finally, we're looking at leadership. Can somebody manage can they hire great people? Can they manage other people, motivate other people? And so those are some of the things we look for. Not everybody has everything, but that's what we think about.
Bill?
So what did I miss?
I think that's pretty comprehensive. I think at the end of the day, the point Mark made that's most important is, the CEO is the outward facing representative of the opportunity and the effort and has to be able to sell to all these parties. And, one thing that we look for very carefully is, can they tell the story? Like when you sit down with a CEO, can they convey the excitement and why what they're doing is so important and why what they're doing is going to make a difference? And it's surprising how often CEOs can't do that very effectively. They're either mired in the science or they're don't understand the science and can't convince people why this is exciting. So I think it's one aspect of they're always selling is how can they tell the story and can they get people excited about it?
I might add one more thing, which is in particular for the audience here, which is often dealing with academic teams. So we will back academic teams. I would say for the most part, the teams we back are a mix of academics and outsiders, and generally the CEO is an outsider, but not always. And so whenever we're backing an academic team, whether it's a grad student, a postdoc, a professor turning CEO, one of the things we are really focused on is how wed is that person to being CEO, because they will need to learn a lot. They will need to prove themselves. And so we spend a lot of time with the team, in particular, figuring out, are they willing to step aside for the right outsider? And how open are they to that, or how challenging will that be? So we ask lots of questions around that. We'll bluntly ask that, like, how long do you see yourself being CEO? What would it take for you to want to bring in an outsider? Do you want to prove yourself here? Like, what's more important to you, you being successful as a CEO or the company being successful? And we'll both dance around the question and be blunt about it. And what we're really trying to figure out is, do they mean it? Do they really mean that for the right person, they are willing to step aside, or are they really determined to be CEO? And a lot of academics, unfortunately, are really determined to be CEO. And that does become a problem for us if they want to put the company first and they'll do what's right for the company, including stepping aside, then that's a very workable configuration for us.
Yeah, the fact is that I think for academic team CEOs, they are almost always replaced before the company reaches an exit. It's very rare for a founding academic CEO to take a company all the way through to an IPO or a meaningful M&A. So the question is that we try to handicap is, when that time comes, how big a challenge will that be? And, it's in the future, it's indeterminate, and it's in success. In failure, it's a little easier, right? But in success, there still may be a time when everything's going great, but you really need a CEO with a different skill set to take the company to the next level. And that's where these conversations become most challenging.
And you guys have mentioned academic founders a few times. Can you talk about academic founders? Like, are you talking about faculty members? Are you talking about grad students? Are you talking postdocs? Are you kind of lumping them all in the same group there? Can you just
I lump them all in the same bucket because it's too hard, at least in life science, it's too hard to parse them out. When I think of, well, let's start with non-academic teams then, right? We're going to define academic. What are we not talking about? And that's the group of executives or experienced industry insiders who identify an area of science or a piece of intellectual property that they go out and license from an institution into a company that they have already created with a team that they have already established. Mm-hmm. Right? Where the science and the intellectual property is coming from the institution, from the university, there's a license, but the team exists outside of the institution and started outside of the institution. And when I think of an academic team, either all or most of it originates within the institution. So there's an academic founder, there may be a postdoc or a grad student or two that are involved in the company. Maybe there's someone in the university ecosystem that is a founding CEO or involved in getting the business side of things together. To me, that's an academic team. And then over time, you start to professionalize that group by hiring folks who are outside of the institution. But I kind of view the world as these external groups and then the internal kind of management teams that originate within the institution.
And I might add on to that what we've seen, some of the characteristics we've seen that make academic teams and academic individuals in a startup more successful. And really, I would highlight two. One is a deep intensity. They want to win more than anything else, and they will do anything to make their company successful. And what that means is that they work incredibly hard. They also work incredibly fast, and not at academic speeds, but at startup speeds. And as you move out of academia into a startup, the speed changes dramatically. And so we're really focused on what speed is this person working on? So if they're really intense, they're living, breathing, thinking about this company all the time, they're moving very fast, making decisions with incomplete information. So that's the intensity side. There's a second aspect, which is deep humility, which is they do not think they know it all. And quite the contrary, they believe they don't know it all, in particular around building a business. And so they go seek out experts and they hire team members who are far better than they are, who are experienced in that domain. They find advisors who can help them. They're a sponge for information, all because at the end of the day, they're deeply humble and realize they don't know it all. So when we back an academic team, it's often because they have this unique duality of huge intensity and deep humility.
All right, I have two more questions on teams and founders, and then we're going to move to investing environment and investment decision making. So, Bill, what are some tips for finding a founding CEO for a therapeutic company trying to spin out of academia? And I will just note to the audience that we did actually just have a webinar 2 weeks ago on finding the CEO for your startup company, and talking about sourcing for that. So in the chat, we're just going to put in a link to that particular webinar, since I think there was a lot of useful information from that webinar on that. Bill, anything you want to mention on that particular question?
Well, that webinar was kind of an in-depth discussion of this, so I don't want to rehash that, but I think there are a few things that you can keep in mind. I mean, one is within the university ecosystem, there are often alums or affiliated individuals who have expertise broadly in areas that touch on whatever area your startup is engaged in. And I would start by reaching out to those individuals, not necessarily for them to be CEOs of your company, but to see if they can help you expand your network within that particular domain. And what you're really looking for is someone who can take the company to the next level, and either it's a CEO or an acting CEO, project manager. I wouldn't get hung up on titles. But most of our institutions have some form of advisory board or advisory council, and through the tech transfer office, there's networks that you can reach out to that have an affinity for that particular institution. The other aspect of this is, Marc described characteristics of a management team. One of the characteristics we look for is an ability to reach out and find people that can help you with your opportunity. So, not relying on your tech transfer office to find a CEO for you, but to get out and start to talk to people in the industry and try to find connections to individuals who might be able to bring that domain expertise to bear on moving your opportunity forward. CEOs are probably the hardest hire to make in these early stage particularly therapeutics company efforts. And so I think you can cast a pretty wide net, and in terms of titles and responsibilities can be more flexible than people think. You don't need a fully baked management team to attract venture capital necessarily. If your idea is good enough and you frame the opportunity appropriately, you can start to attract seed capital. And one of the primary, functions of a seed investor is to help build management teams and help you do this. So I think, there's your own network, there's the institutional ecosystem, and then there's trying to reach out to seed and even angel investors for that matter, who are well-versed and experienced in trying to help connect you with appropriate folks to manage the business sides of your effort. But the thing I would not do is get hung up on finding a biotech CEO, because that may not be available to you this early in your company's life.
Thanks so much, Bill. Marc, moving on to you on a totally different topic, but also about building teams. This is a question that just came in from one of our audience members. How can academic founders leverage their university resources and networks to build more diverse and inclusive teams from the start? And do you see some common challenges, especially as they go seek VC funding?
Yeah, I'd say the starting point for like having a diverse and inclusive team often comes from the lab itself. If the lab is diverse and inclusive, and some of those lab members come into the startup, you've got a good starting point there. And that's often what we've seen. And then the challenge there is on the recruiting side. So whatever is the composition of the founders, what you don't want to do is just go recruit people who are just like the founders. And so you want to recruit much more broadly than that. And we do see that as a challenge sometimes, where a team all has certain commonalities and they like to work together and they recruit people just like them. And more than anything, you have to recognize it and push to get out of that mindset and your networks. So and to do that though, like recruiting is unfortunately the most manual part of building any company. Like there is no great automated way to go recruit a team. You need to meet as many people as possible. You need to build your network. And so what you need to do is always be recruiting all the time. That includes going to conferences and meeting people there. It includes actually during fundraising, using VCs to meet their network and actually using your fundraising efforts to recruit other people. It means using LinkedIn aggressively to just try to connect with people and using, recruiting manually through LinkedIn. And you need to, most CEOs would say they probably spend a good third of their time recruiting. That is a constant job requirement. And so you need to put in the time to do that.
One other aspect of diversity that I think I'd like to touch on is beyond the team, is most of these companies, all of them in life science and therapeutics, and often in tech, have various technical or scientific advisory boards. And, it's a who's who of a field. But the one thing that we have seen over and over again is for a PI to recruit his or her friends to those advisory boards. Those are scientists with whom they may have collaborated on publications or who view the world in a similar way. And as investors, what we want is the most diverse set of opinions on our advisory board that push back on things that the company is generating and positions they're taking, just like we would do as investors trying to find as many diverse points of view on a topic. I think the fact that these advisory boards are often kind of all flavors, versions of the same flavor tend to be a problem. So I think as you start to recruit outside scientists as advisors, really look to build as diverse a group of opinions as you can, even if they conflict with your own as the founder, because that will sell well to investors and they're going to do it anyway. That's what we do as part of our diligence. So you might as well bring that in-house and, the kind of keep your rivals close.
Thank you both. Moving on to investing. Everyone's really interested, obviously, in the environment that has been happening over the last couple of years. So let's talk a little bit about the investment environment in your particular areas, including valuations. So Mark, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, just a couple of high-level thoughts, and then I can get into some specifics. At a high level, it's been a challenging environment, but we do see improvements on it. So we do see deal velocity increasing. We do see the exit environment improving a little bit. So it's been a challenging environment overall, but things are getting better. And we see it within our own portfolio at OUP and our own deal pace and more broadly. Second, I would say venture has always been a little bit of a world of a small number of halves of darlings of the venture sector, both individual companies and sectors, and everything else is at a very kind of different pace. And that is accentuated right now, where you have a small, like a very small number of darlings. And you see that in like the AI sector, where you have investors chasing each other to invest in what are considered to be premier companies at crazy, crazy valuations. You may have seen OpenAI just raised $6 billion at over $150 billion valuation, which is very difficult to justify analytically. And then outside of that small bubble, for everybody else, it's really challenging. And so you can kind of get encouraged or discouraged by either side of that. Sometimes we see people focus on those darling companies and say, we're just like them. And usually that is not really a reliable roadmap for you, but you do have this kind of have and have-nots environment. And for us, we invest in both kinds of companies. When we invest in companies, sometimes we'll invest in companies that have a lot of momentum, perhaps have a premium valuation. That's often where our participation rate, one of our university partners' participation rights matters for us to be able to actually get access to those companies. And then sometimes we'll find companies that we've known for a while because our universities introduced us to them early, and we've developed strong confidence in the team and their technology by watching them, even if the market is ignoring them. And so we will build portfolios of both, darling companies and the companies that are just kind of going about it the old-fashioned way. Going kind of deeper, I would say, one of the things that has been behind the challenging side of this market is that venture funds themselves have been having a difficult time raising capital. So the venture industry is only as good as the venture funds being able to raise capital from outside investors so they can deploy it into startups. That capital raising has been very difficult over the last several years. OUP, we raised our fourth fund in 2023. We were successful, but it was hard. It was much harder than it had been previously to do so. And you see a lot of funds not succeeding in raising capital. You see some funds actually shutting down. So the number of funds in the industry is going to decline a little bit, which makes it harder to fundraise. There's also a dynamic where a small number of funds raise huge, huge funds in the market. So you see a little bit of concentration in the industry. So, but the venture fund climate has been a little bit challenging. On the life science side, there have been some funds successfully raised recently that have a lot of dry capital. At OUP, we have a lot of dry capital now. So there's still lots of funds with capital, but it's been hard. And then, things that have been improving, in particular, the biotech public market has improved lately. So there have been a number of recent biotech IPOs in OUP. We just had one of our portfolio companies go public, and you're starting to see that window open up a little bit. And should that continue, that will translate all the way down kind of the stage chain, all the way down to early stage funding, hopefully improving. So let me stop there. Bill, do you want to fill in any other comments or gaps on the market?
No, I think that you've touched on it. During the 2020, 2021 period, the biotech public markets were very frothy, and we saw a lot of companies go public very early in their development. Many of them were preclinical. Many of them really had no business being public. And when that market collapsed, it has taken a few years for that to kind of work its way through. And we are seeing that now kind of start to taper off. And as you point out, Mark, the public markets are opening up for more interesting companies. But, the biotech markets are similar. They're looking for darlings, right? It's obesity drugs, it's next gen GLP agonists and antagonists. It's kind of the AI version of biotech. And there's a real question: is that hype really going to deliver? And I think jury's out.
Great. Well, it's nice to see some more enthusiasm and positivity definitely in the markets as well overall. Bill, we're going to talk about therapeutics for just a minute here. What are top determinants of whether a therapeutic is VC or startup ready? And what kind of data do you like to see generated prior to investing? And I know this isn't going to be the same for everything, but if you can give us a somewhat generalist answer here, that would be terrific.
Sure. I mean, I think there's a few things that you really need to have. Let's set aside the rock star PI for a minute. That's in an exciting area. That's one of Marc's darlings. It's going to attract a lot of attention. But for most companies spinning out therapeutics companies, there's got to be some core scientific biologic insight. Right? There's got to be something that's truly novel. And these days, you really are looking at first in class, best in class, better in class, sort of next gen follow on opportunities are not viewed with the same enthusiasm as something that can truly be first in class. So I think trying to figure out how that makes sense for your scientific discovery is important. Slightly better doesn't cut it anymore. Second is you need to figure out what specific experiments do you need to conduct to really convince investors that this science has applicability in the commercial opportunity or the clinical opportunity that you're going to claim in your fundraising pitch. So there's a lot of scientific discoveries. This is true in tech as well, where there's a discovery that has potential application across a dozen clinical conditions. And, too often the academic management team will come present all 12 and add them all up to a $5 billion opportunity. And the fact is, all 12 require very different routes of development, very different risk profiles of development, very different costs of development. So they're not all equal. And you really need to figure out the equivalent of a product market fit on the drug side as you do on the tech side. So what is the most attractive, most approachable, most attainable clinical indication? And what do you need to do? What can you do in the university ecosystem to answer some of those questions? One way to try to understand it is to reach out to knowledgeable investors early. Say, help me understand what you would want to see. You don't need to guess. And most investors, particularly those that are looking at seed or early stage opportunities, are more than happy to meet with PIs and talk about what they'd want to see in terms of translational experiments. Often there are folks in the ecosystem that have been there and been experienced in drug development. They can help as well. Usually there's a big question. This particular area of biology raises a major toxicity concern, so you need to address that, right? Bioavailability is a problem. It always has been in this particular class of compound. You have to address that up front. The kind of obvious big questions that have occurred in the past in whatever field of endeavor you're in, you want to get past that. It's like, yeah, this has been a problem for these 5 companies that have tried to do this. We've got a solution to it, and here's an experiment. Here's some data to prove or support our contention that this issue in the past no longer applies to us. Right? This drug has never been able to get through the blood-brain barrier. This category, this class of compounds, we have figured out a way to do that, and let us show you the mouse data to prove it. So it's figuring out what is the big question and trying to answer that early. And every one of these companies has a big question.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Sorry about that. Got caught on my own mute. Marc, We just talked about the at least rosier outlook that we have at least on the funding side, but VC funding is still down overall. What are other options you think startups could be using to fill the gaps? What options have you been seeing them use?
Yeah, anything and everything they can, and the more creative the team, the better. And so it starts with being really scrappy and trying to figure out how do you make progress with no money if you can do it, and then looking for other unique sources of capital. In the physical science world, sometimes that can come from customer funding. So you can develop products jointly with customers where they become design partners, give you NRE. And so customer funding and prospective customer funding can often be incredibly helpful to a company and replace having to raise equity. There are also incubators and accelerators, some of which come with some capital, although the dollar amounts are generally not that large. And then there's all of the government funding, NSF, DOD, all the SBIRs and STTRs, everything you can do to find other sources of capital is what you have to do. And alongside trying to make progress without any capital, which is easy to say, hard to do, but we do see companies do that. And sometimes it's because teams aren't taking salaries for a while, and they're really just being scrappy.
That's a lot harder to do on the therapeutic side. I mean, it's hard to make progress without capital. There are sources of capital that you can, access that are less dilutive, non-dilutive kind of grants and the like, but it's very hard to make any kind of material progress without access to money.
I would say, it's an interesting source of kind of differences within AUP because we invest both in tech companies and life science companies. Kind of the early funding dynamics are often different. So a tech company can often start with $1 million or $2 million of capital, and they can make a lot of progress. And as a tech investor, sometimes I push on Bill to say, why can't our life science companies just raise a couple $1 million of capital, get further along, and then go raise a large round later? Because the dilution is less if you can delay raising large rounds until your valuation has grown. But I've become resigned to the fact that it's not the way it works on the life science side for the most part.
Although we are seeing, we talked about this a little bit earlier, though, we are seeing some institutions and collaboration among institutions put resources in place to try to take that first million or two of capital and have resources within the institution that can answer those questions that in the past may have taken a few $1 million from the outside. That's about as far as you can really get. And beyond that, when I started in this business, the Series A financing was $5 million. It was like a medium-sized Series A. Now they're 50. So the dollars accelerate really quickly. But I think there still are things that institutions and founding teams can do within an institution to advance the ball to a point where they're a lot more attractive to outsiders. And we're seeing that across our university ecosystem.
Absolutely. So many more resources internally, and the academic institutions really have been doing a really good job at building engines to make that happen. Bill, next question to you, and this is about VCs leading. Why do some VCs decide to lead more than others? And is there kind of an average that VCs typically lead, et cetera? Could you just talk about the leading part of an investment in a round?
Yeah, I mean, leading an investment generally means that you, as the investor, have identified an opportunity, you've done your diligence, you've developed the valuation model and a thesis around how much money this company is going to require to get to an exit of some sort, whether it's a trade sale or an IPO, how many rounds of financing, how many years, what the dilution looks like over that period of time, and kind of walk that back to this, we'll call it a Series A financing. And you figure with all of that background, okay, what is the right valuation today? How much money does the company really need to make to incrementally retire some risks so we can raise more money? What do we think the company's worth at the time it exits? We've gone through this in our valuation webinar. You kind of work your way back from what it's worth at exit to how much money it's going to take to get there, to dilution over time, to what today's price is. So leading a financing is really, to some extent, an art form, because none of this is quantitative, right? You've got to decide what makes sense for a financing, how much money does the company need today? Is it tranched over time, or is it in one fell swoop? What are the milestones that, if retired, will allow the company to, number one, be de-risked, and number two, raise money at a higher price for the next financing? And then what does the team look like? Like, what do we need to, where are the holes in the team? What do we need to hire? What are we going to require the team to hire in terms of additional team members if we're going to invest? You've got to do the legal and intellectual property diligence so you understand what that landscape looks like. Usually there are issues that come out of that get rolled into it. And then all of that kind of rolls into a term sheet, which is a set of economic and non-economic control terms that under which you as an investor will invest in the company. Usually if you're leading, and there are firms that will do an entire financing by themselves, usually you syndicate financing. So there's a lead investor that architects a term sheet and a series of economic and non-economic terms with the company that's agreed to. Then you go out and find other investors to join the syndicate. Leading an investment gives you great control. You get to decide, is this a deal you want to do, at what price, under what terms, and you establish those terms. If you're not leading, you look at companies where that's been done. A lead investor has already set that up and they're looking to syndicate. Usually they reach out to groups they've worked with before and say, hey, we've got this deal. Here are the terms. Here's what they're doing. But as a non-lead investor or follower, you don't get to set those terms. And you generally have less control going forward. Some venture capital firms lead all of their investments. It's part of their thesis and what they represent to their investors. Others, and a contrary opinion is, hey, leading these deals takes so much time. I'd rather spend our time evaluating companies that already have leads and see which of those I'd like to participate in. Sometimes you can get into those syndicates, sometimes you can't. But generally, lead investors have great domain expertise. They can write a large check, right? If you're going to lead an investment, you've got to be able to cover most of it yourself. And you have the ability to take a board seat and a leadership role in that company and steer that company going forward, which means you have great conviction in what you're doing. And some firms lead most of their deals, all of their deals. At OUP in the early days, we didn't really lead any deals because the way the participation rights work. As time went on, we started to lead more deals, and we still are willing to lead a number of deals in, OUP4, our current fund, will probably lead a handful of deals there because we have certain conviction and circumstances allow us to do that.
Thanks, Bill. Marc, anything you want to add on the tech side regarding leading deals?
No, I think it's largely similar. I would put emphasis if you're either on the tech transfer side or the founder side and thinking about a lead investor, you do want somebody who you believe can help you once the financing is closed. And so the lead investor is often one of your closest confidants and partners in building the company, hiring a team, and building a strategy. And so you want to make sure you're really connected with them on the same page and you feel like they're skilled at it.
Great. Thank you both. Marc, what are some steps outside of U.S. companies can take when preparing to enter the U.S. markets and get support from VCs in the U.S.? Because a lot of the institutions we work with aren't necessarily in the U.S. And actually, even some of the institutions that are in the U.S. don't always have companies that actually found themselves inside the U.S.
Yeah. First, I'd say you don't have to access the U.S. in any regard. You don't need to raise capital in the U.S. There are sources of capital internationally, and so the U.S. is not everything. But should you decide as part of your strategy, you want to either enter the U.S. market with your products or fundraise from U.S. investors or have a presence here, more than anything, what you just need are a series of touch points in the U.S. So if it's, a tech company, it could mean US customers, just landing a few US customers, or go-to-market partners, or hiring a sales and marketing team in the US, or just having a few connections to VCs in the US that can help open other doors. So it could be any combination of those. It doesn't have to be only one. But the more, if you care about the US market, but from a fundraising standpoint and a customer standpoint, just the more touch points you can get early that give you legitimacy. And so people believe that you belong here, and that, like in particular on the tech side, that one of your largest target markets is the US. That makes it easier to then fundraise here.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Bill, a question for you on the therapeutics side. Are there specific pharma fields or indications that have an easier time recruiting CEOs? Any idea on that?
That's an interesting question. I don't think any particular area in therapeutics is any easier or harder. I think oncology, because there is such a relatively large number of oncology startups that are started and developed and fail every year. It's a big percentage, probably the largest percentage of venture dollars in therapeutics go into oncology companies. So there's probably more talent around in oncology with oncology experience. Doesn't mean that that's the best place to invest right now. I mean, oncology is a little bit out of favor at the moment, but I don't think there's any particular area in therapeutics that's particularly easy or particularly hard to find executive talent. I think it's hard everywhere.
All right. Thanks.
Kirsten, there was one thing that I know Mark has been dancing around all day and has been unwilling to address this up front.
I didn't realize I was dancing.
Today is Mark's birthday, and on behalf of myself and my colleagues here at OUP, I just want to extend him a warm birthday wishes. I'm sure all of you on the call feel the same, but I did not want to let this opportunity slip by, Mark. So happy birthday.
Thank you, Bill. And I'll remind our audience, you probably don't know, Bill's office is right next door to mine. So payback is hell.
Happy birthday.
Yes, happy birthday, Mark. And so, and kudos to Mark for doing this on his birthday. Mark, I'm going to pass the next question to you then. And actually, this is probably a question for both of you, but we'll start off with you, Mark. And it's the question that comes in from one of our audience members. It's about paying the CEO of a startup company. How do you pay the CEO initially to the points that they've fundraised and then to company sale? How does that typically look for a tech company? And then Bill asks you the same on the life sciences side.
It's a real struggle, in particular if you haven't raised capital yet. And so what it kind of sends you down a path of are working with CEOs or potential CEOs who actually don't need the current income, meaning hopefully they've been successful in the past and they can work for 6 months or a year without income until you raise the first round for the company. And ideally, like you would have those kinds of candidates who don't need the money and they're focused on creating equity value. And what they care about is not their paycheck in the near term, but the value of their equity in the long term. And it's why founding CEOs and founding team members get very large amounts of equity in the company because they're taking a lot of risk. Often it means working without pay for a while. And in return, they get tremendous upside in the company if it's successful. So before you raise capital, you have no choice but just find the right people who have the right mindset and give them lots of equity to make it worth their while. Once you do raise capital, you still want to be very careful to basically pay below market salaries to people because every dollar counts and you don't want all of your money going out the door quickly, in particular to salary. And second, you do want people to be still focused on equity value and not be comfortable on their current compensation. So throughout the first, in particular, several years of a company's life, you generally want to hire people who are willing to work for below market salaries because they believe in the mission of the company and they believe in the equity value in the future. And then as the company scales, what happens as you're successful and raise more capital, then over time you can normalize your salaries to the market. And sometimes companies wind up paying, some of the best companies wind up paying above market later because they're doing well, they can raise capital cheaply, and they want the best team that they can find. I'll say as an interesting example, last night there was a computer science conference in Philadelphia right now. Last night we had a dinner with a number of attendees, some of which had been at some very successful startups in the past. One of them described their own startup, which has been wildly successful, as a Moneyball team. You know, it was a team that didn't look great on paper. They weren't the tops of their fields, but they were incredibly skilled. And implicit in the Moneyball team is they were not the most expensive team members out in the market, if you've actually read the book Moneyball. And that was a success ingredient for that startup. They had exactly what I'm talking about. People who weren't there for salary, but there for equity.
Same question to you, Bill, on the life sciences side. I love the Moneyball analogy.
Different. I think biotech is a little different. I think, the first emerging team that we talked about coming out of academia, you haven't really raised money yet. You don't have the option to pay people a lot. So that's where equity matters. And as an investor, you like to see a team that's motivated by equity and long-term value creation and not just current income. That changes pretty quickly in biotech. As soon as you start hiring an outside CEO, those salaries are eye-popping. And it is very hard to, even if you're trying to be below market, which I agree with Mark, that's kind of what we want to see the early teams target their salary levels. Those numbers are still pretty high. And there's no way around that. And as you get into the middle level, companies raising Series B or entering the clinic, those CEO salaries become really astronomical. And one can argue if it's worth it or not, but it is market, and it's very difficult to buck that trend. So I think as you migrate, and the investors are well aware of this, so as your company migrates out of academia into a more commercial, more standalone kind of entity, you're going to end up paying those experienced CEOs a lot of money. And we all do it, and we suffer together, but that's really where the market is.
All right, we have 2 minutes left. Katie's going to put in the chat a link for everyone if they want to answer our survey. We do appreciate it. It actually will be a pop-up when you leave the webinar as well. But I do want to get a couple last questions in before we finish up. So I need semi-lightning answers to these questions. So Bill, first to you. What's the perception of having a spinoff led by someone who is an early stage tenure track faculty member? Is it possible to raise a seed round while simultaneously bringing on a CEO so that the tenure track person can be involved, but not 100% since the dual role might not be optimal?
Sure. I mean, we see that all the time where a tenured faculty member is involved. They're not going to leave their day job. So you just need to have that answer ready to go. But we see that all the time.
Yeah. Okay, great. Next one is also to Bill. Do we invest in digital health, FDA regulated? Actually, this is also to Mark because it's this is kind of crossover. And what do we look for in terms of a data package?
We have not. We will look at almost anything. We have not made a lot of data.
Digital health.
Or IT digital health investments. It's an area that we have looked at jointly with the tech and the life science team together. It's almost more fallen into the tech side more than the life science side. But we have not done much there.
Okay. And then in AI-driven drug discovery, Bill, that's been in the news a lot recently. What is the perception, or is there a current thinking regarding natural product-based drug discovery and development to derive new therapeutics?
Well, natural products and AI, I mean, there's two questions there.
Little question. It seems to me to all 2 questions too. Yeah.
So using AI in drug discovery is now table stakes. Every company that we see, whether they actually use it or not, have it on their slides. We need to decipher how they use AI in that. But it has become a very powerful tool and an evolving tool in drug discovery and development. So and there are companies that are built around AI engines specifically for that. Then there are other companies that are using AI tools, kind of we'll call it off the shelf, to help with drug discovery and development. And then natural products is its own sort of area of endeavor and source of opportunity in drug product. And that's a separate discussion altogether. But you can use AI tools in any of those endeavors.
Thanks so much, Bill. We are actually over time now. And so thanks for everyone for staying on. If you do have any other questions for us, you're always welcome to reach out to us and we can follow up on those. We did have a couple more remaining questions. So please just reach out to us. We will try to answer them and get back to you. Some of them are anonymous, and so I can't tell you right back to on them. So please do just follow up with us, and we're always happy to answer questions. Bill, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today and always doing this terrific webinar where you just answer any and every question that people have on particular areas. I know we didn't get to all the topics that we had planned to talk about, but we did hopefully get to all the topics that the people who wrote in to us wanted to talk about. So thank you so much for joining us, to our audience as well today, and bringing such terrific questions to our two panelists today. So everyone enjoy the rest of your day. Bill and Mark, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.